What separates a 5-second clip of a train arriving at a station from a 3-hour epic about the creation of the atomic bomb? The answer is over 130 years of evolution, innovation, and revolution. Hollywood didn't just grow. It exploded, collapsed, rebuilt itself, and reinvented the rules over and over again. Today, we're breaking down every major Hollywood era, from experimental moving pictures to algorithm-driven streaming. We'll explore how each period emerged from the last, what caused the shifts, and what it all reveals about the most powerful storytelling machine ever created. Pioneer Era. Before there were stars, studios, or sound, or anything closely related to motion pictures, all the world had was a camera. Then came the Pioneer Era, which can be summarized as an era of magicians with cameras. In the late 1800s, inventors across the world were racing to capture motion itself, to trap time on film. In France, the Lumiere brothers shocked cafe audiences with workers leaving the factory. 1895, proof that ordinary life could hold cinematic power. Across the Atlantic, American pioneers like Edwin S. Porter and D.W. Griffith were figuring out the same language. Porter's The Great Train Robbery, 1903, stitched together shots from different angles and invented the action sequence. Meanwhile, Georges Méliès, a stage illusionist, pointed the camera at fantasy instead of reality. A Trip to the Moon, 1902, didn't just entertain. It invented the idea that film could transport you somewhere impossible. These were one-man operations, part science experiment, part magic show. Cameras had to be cranked by hand, and every second of footage cost money and risk. Yet filmmakers kept pushing, turning what started as novelty clips, people sneezing, trains arriving, into visual stories with beginnings and endings, narrative art. But this new art form also became a business. Nickelodeon's tiny storefront theaters charging 5 cents per show sprang up in every city. Demand exploded, and with it came the first production companies, Edison, Biograph, and Vitagraph. Patents turned into monopolies. Lawsuits flew. Edison was on the hunt for filmmakers that wouldn't pay his license fees or use his equipment. He even went after anybody that wanted to create movies longer than his. This made filmmakers who couldn't afford to pay the Edison Trust's licensing fees flee west in search of cheaper land, better weather, and distance from lawyers. They found a sleepy Los Angeles neighborhood with orange groves and sunlight for days. That's how Hollywood became shorthand for movie making. Not because it was predestined, but because it was far enough from New Jersey. A few decades later, the Pioneer Era ended, but not with a bang, but with a blueprint. Storytelling had been discovered. Audiences had been trained, and a few dusty lots in Southern California had begun turning sunlight into money. But it was the next era that would take that foundation and build an empire on top of it. Silent Hollywood. By the 1910s, Hollywood wasn't just a place, it was a system. The lawsuits and chaos of the pioneer years gave way to structure, ambition, and control. Filmmakers fleeing Edison's patent war built new studios under the California sun, laying the groundwork for an industry designed to mass-produce dreams. And with equipment that could capture only motion without sound available, it became the era of silent movies. Out of this came the studio system, vertically integrated empires that made, distributed, and screened their own films. Universal, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox, and MGM rose from dusty lots into factory-sized dream machines. Every role, actor, writer, camera operator became part of a well-oiled production line. And within that machine, stars were born. Audiences didn't just watch movies, they worshipped personalities. The first movie stars, Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and Douglas Fairbanks, turned their fame into leverage, forming United Artists in 1919, the first sign that creators could fight back against the studio's control. Meanwhile, the language of cinema matured. Filmmakers like F.W. Murnau, Inci Sunrise, and Sergei Eisenstein, Battleship Potemkin, redefined what images could express. Movement as metaphor, cuts as emotion. Silent film became universal speech. By the late 1920s, Hollywood was exporting its mythology worldwide. Glamour, ambition, and fantasy rolled into reels of silver nitrate. Movie palaces turned screenings into events. The audience came dressed for escape. The silent era ended when sound arrived, but its influence never left. It taught filmmakers that pictures alone could move people, that rhythm, light, and expression were enough to tell a story. But that wasn't enough, as the next revolution wouldn't just be seen, it would be heard. By the early 1930s, Hollywood had found its voice, literally. The arrival of synchronized sound turned cinema from novelty into dominance. Silent stars either adapted or vanished, while a new generation of performers learned to act with their voices as much as their faces. At the center of it all was the studio system, a machine of unmatched efficiency. MGM, Paramount, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and RKO controlled everything: production, distribution, and exhibition. Their logos became marks of quality and identity. Each studio had its style: MGM for glamour, Warner for grit, and Paramount for sophistication. The system produced hundreds of films a year, from prestige dramas to musical escapism. Hollywood's star system transformed actors into brands. Cary Grant, Bette Davis, Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, names that guaranteed box office gold. Publicists carefully crafted their images, selling not just performances but personas. Audiences came to the movies not only for the story but also to see their star triumph again. Then Technicolor came, adding spectacle. The late 1930s gave us Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz, both released in 1939, often called Hollywood's greatest year. Genres flourished: screwball comedies, film noir, westerns, and musicals each offered different flavors of escape or reflection. Then World War II changed the tone. Hollywood became part of the war effort, producing propaganda and morale boosters from Casablanca to Mrs. Miniver. When soldiers returned, filmmakers turned inward. Post-war movies explored cynicism, identity, and loss. The best years of our lives in Sunset Boulevard revealed a maturing industry learning to look at itself, but cracks began to show. The Paramount Decree of 1948, which forced studios to give up their ownership of theaters, broke those studios' monopoly on theaters. Television arrived, pulling audiences home. By the 1950s, widescreen epics like Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments fought to bring them back, but the old system was dying. Still, the Golden Age left a permanent mark. It standardized the art form, built icons that never faded, and created a mythology around movies themselves. For 3 decades, Hollywood didn't just entertain, it defined what entertainment was. But it was the next era would change Hollywood forever, replacing the old guard, New Hollywood. By the 1960s, the Golden Age was crumbling. The studio system had collapsed under its own weight, too rigid, too slow to adapt. Television had stolen living rooms, audiences were aging out, and the old moral codes that shaped pre-war Hollywood no longer fit a country facing Vietnam, civil rights struggles, and political scandal. So what did this mean for Hollywood? Well, it meant a revolution. A new generation of filmmakers, young, hungry, and film school trained, broke through the system's ruins. They were influenced by the French New Wave, Italian neorealism, and Japanese cinema, and they wanted truth, not polish. The studio gatekeepers, desperate for hits, let them experiment. Out of that freedom came films that changed everything. Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, Easy Rider, Taxi Driver, The Godfather, Chinatown, and Apocalypse Now. This was New Hollywood, raw, character-driven, and morally complex. Heroes became anti-heroes. Endings grew ambiguous. Violence, sex, and realism replaced fantasy. Directors like Scorsese, Coppola, Spielberg, Lucas, and Altman turned filmmaking into personal expression. For the first time since Chaplin, directors became stars in their own right. The 1970s were cinema's creative high. Jaws and Star Wars redefined the business, proving that massive hits could come from bold ideas and technical mastery. Ironically, those same successes would also shift power back to the studios. The blockbuster was born, and Hollywood realized it could make billions selling spectacle. By the 1980s, the counterculture edge had softened. Studios embraced the blockbuster formula: high concept, wide appeal, marketable stars, sequels, and merchandising. E.T., Back to the Future, and Indiana Jones ruled the box office. And so the personal, risky cinema of the 70s gave way to a new era of commercial dominance. Still, New Hollywood left a scar and a legacy. It reminded the industry that art and commerce don't have to be enemies and that rebellion could be profitable. It was proof that one visionary director with a camera and conviction could rewrite the rules of an empire. And it was that new vision that will show Hollywood that it could be as profitable as any other industry. Blockbuster era. The 1980s marked a seismic shift. The rebellious creativity of the 70s gave birth to a new beast, the blockbuster. Studios learned that spectacle sold, and they built entire empires on that discovery. Jaws and Star Wars had proven the model, but the 80s perfected it. Movies weren't just films anymore, they were events. Audiences lined up for weeks to see Ghostbusters, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Top Gun, and Batman. These were cultural moments, tightly marketed, star-powered, and supported by merchandise, soundtracks, and endless sequels. The movie didn't end when the credits rolled, it lived on in toys, posters, and lunchboxes. Studios became corporate machines again, but this time the product was global. With home video booming and multiplexes multiplying, Hollywood realized it could reach every corner of the planet. The VHS tape turned films into long-term assets. Cable networks like HBO created new revenue streams. A movie wasn't just a weekend release, it was a brand with a lifespan. Technology began to transform everything. The arrival of computer-generated imagery, CGI, reshaped visual storytelling. James Cameron's The Abyss and Terminator. 2 showed what digital effects could do, and Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park made audiences believe dinosaurs were real. The impossible became routine. Meanwhile, the 1990s saw independent cinema push back. Directors like Quentin Tarantino, Richard Linklater, and the Coen brothers revived the spirit of New Hollywood. Stylized, self-aware, and dialogue-driven. Pulp Fiction proved that even in the blockbuster age, originality could still shake the system. By the end of the 90s, Hollywood was both a machine and a myth. Titanic became the ultimate symbol. Massive, emotional, technically groundbreaking, and globally unstoppable. It was a dream factory fully industrialized. The blockbuster era turned Hollywood into the world's dominant cultural force. Its heroes flew, its villains exploded, and its stories crossed every border. But behind the box office gold, critics began asking, had Hollywood traded risk for reliability, art for spectacle, the franchise age? The turn of the millennium changed everything. Film, the physical reel that had defined cinema for a century, began to disappear. Digital cameras replaced celluloid. Computer effects replaced sets. The tools of filmmaking were no longer exclusive. Anyone with a laptop could edit, shoot, and share a story. At first, this digital revolution felt liberating. Filmmakers like Peter Jackson and George Lucas embraced it fully. The Lord of the Rings trilogy proved that digital effects could build entire worlds without losing soul, while Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace showed both the promise and pitfalls of CGI excess. Pixar's Toy Story and Finding Nemo cemented animation as a storytelling powerhouse. But technology also reshaped business. DVDs, then streaming, rewired how audiences consumed movies. The theater was no longer the only destination. The screen had followed people home, then into their pockets. Box office dominance became just one part of a larger ecosystem of revenue and attention. Out of that shift came the franchise era. Studios realized that shared universes could guarantee returns. Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, and The Matrix kicked off the trend. But Marvel's Iron Man 2008 changed the game entirely. The Marvel Cinematic Universe transformed serialized storytelling into a global business model. Each film wasn't just a release, it was a chapter in a never-ending saga. Meanwhile, independent film found new life, festivals like Sundance and platforms like YouTube and Netflix. Directors such as Christopher Nolan, Catherine Bigelow, and Paul Thomas Anderson kept the spirit of auteur filmmaking alive within or in spite of the system. The 2010s pushed everything to scale. Avatar redefined visual spectacle, The Dark Knight redefined the blockbuster's depth, and streaming giants like Netflix began producing their own originals, blurring the line between film and television. Hollywood had gone digital, global, and interconnected, but some wondered what it had lost in the process. The art form had evolved, but the industry had consolidated. The age of risk had become the age of replication, and the next era will be known exactly for that, replication. Streaming era. By the 2020s, cinema had entered uncharted territory. Theaters were no longer the heart of movie culture. The internet was. Streaming services like Netflix, Amazon, Disney+, and Apple TV+ didn't just compete with Hollywood. They became Hollywood. The line between film and television, blockbuster and miniseries, release and algorithm blurred completely. The pandemic accelerated the shift. With theaters shuttered, studios went digital overnight. Wonder Woman, 1984, Black Widow, and Dune premiered online, testing new models of release. What had once been an event, the movie theater experience was now a subscription tab. Streaming changed not just how films were delivered, but how they were made. Data replaced instinct, algorithms dictated greenlights, content became the new word for storytelling, flattening the difference between an Oscar contender and a viral reality show. As Martin Scorsese warned, cinema risked being systematically devalued. Yet in the same moment, globalization opened new doors. Korean cinema surged with Parasite making history at the Oscars. Indian, Nigerian, and European industries exploded with international audiences through platforms that ignored borders. Although they aren't Hollywood in the literal sense, they are all backed by the machine that is Hollywood. Filmmaking became more democratic, less centralized, and more diverse than ever before. Visually, storytelling stretched across formats. From TikTok shorts to IMAX epics, creators who once needed Hollywood's approval now build their own audiences directly. The tools of production were accessible. The real power lay in visibility, but the new system carried its own contradictions. While streaming promised freedom, it also led to homogenization. Endless sequels, remakes, and universes engineered for bingeability. The independent middle, films too small for spectacle, too big for YouTube, nearly vanished. Still, this era is far from settled. The fall of exclusivity has sparked a new creative frontier. Visionary directors are finding ways to blend scale and intimacy, commerce and art, physical and digital. Whether on a cinema screen or a phone, film remains what it always was, a mirror held up to the human experience, endlessly reinvented. From the Nickelodeons of the 1890s to the streaming platforms of today, every era of Hollywood has been a battle between art and commerce, vision and control. Each generation of filmmakers has inherited a system built by the last and then found new ways to break it. Today, film is no longer bound by borders or screens. A teenager can shoot a short on a phone and reach millions. An auteur in Seoul, Lagos, or Mexico City can influence Hollywood itself. The camera's power has never been more accessible or more contested. The question isn't whether movies will survive. They'll already have, again and again. The question is what form they'll take next and who will define them. So we ask, which era is your favorite? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And here's one final question before you go. If you could only watch films from one era for the rest of your life, which era would you choose?